Yeah. Before we continue, just correct the motivation. Try to make sure we're on the right track. Yes, it is. All right. So yeah, now I have to explain ignorance, I suppose.
Is that it?
Yeah, so because of the question of David, you know, yeah, so we talked about this before the break. We talked about kind of professional realities of destructive emotions, how this destructive emotion actually causes suffering. So the question is, can we eliminate them? Yeah, that's a very important thing to know. And if you know that, then the question will come how, and the energy will come to do it. Right? So we talked about a few things already. They know the contrary reality, not any part of the mind. They come, abide, and disintegrate by the power of cause and conditions. Right? Destructive emotions, they not always present. They come up by some irritation or attachment or whatever affliction comes up, but then it abides for some time and it disintegrates again. Right? So that proves it's in the nature of momentary changing aspects of cause and conditions. And so in Tibetan, we also talked about dependent origination, right? The teaching of the sublime, teaching of the Buddha, being sublime in the sense of understanding dependent origination, right? So this aspect of dependent origination, in Tibetan there's a term called Tendel Jik, means to organize dependent origination. We cannot change the law. Right, as we just discussed, we cannot change that fire is hot and burning. Right, that's reality. But we can prevent it from putting our hand into the fire. Right, so with the same thing, this law of dependent origination is a law we cannot change, but we can play with causes and conditions. Right? So that's same in the scientific world. We do the same thing. If we want to make a new structure of a particular molecule or invent something newly, we have to abide within what is possible, within that law of causality, within that law of nature, right? So within that we can move things around. We're playing with cause and conditions. So our mind, same thing, right? So in our mind we have this kind of, all kind of aspects of the mind which we can play with. So that means, in Tibetan there's the same, Tendel Dik means to organize dependent origination, right? So meaning exactly what the Buddha said, understanding that process of our mind, of what causes suffering and what causes happiness, and then make sure you create the right causes for things to come about. Right? So generate these constructive forms of consciousness and eliminate these wrong forms of consciousness. Right? So there's a whole process to it for temporary relief of destructive emotions, and the process for complete elimination, which we achieve the state of nirvana, right? So now we're gonna try to explain to you how we temporarily can get rid of these afflictions and how we can get rid of them full stop. Finished, katam. In India we say katam means like finished. So it means the possibility of complete elimination of destructive emotions, right? So yeah. So first of all, the temporary. So the temporary aspect of destructive emotions we can take care of by opposing it with correct forms of consciousness, or destructive emotions being opposed by constructive way of thinking. Okay? So practicing patience, yeah, versus anger, for example. Right? So how do we do that? First of all, we have to get a kind of what we call self-awareness. Without being aware of what's going on inside the mind, it's very difficult to move forward, right? So first we have to build up some awareness. You know? So most of the time our mind is so distracted, there's no possibility of knowing what's going inside. You know? So that means that the majority of these people, they can't sit still anymore. If you put them on a chair in a room where it's completely empty, with no phone, with nothing, some people freak out. They can't do it anymore. So it's very sad, you know. But if you don't have that aspect of checking what's going on in your inner world, then it's very difficult to do anything further than that. You know. So that's why first there has to become a kind of self-awareness, right? Being aware. So how do we accomplish that self-awareness? There's many methods. many techniques, you know, many kind of meditations on kind of observing the body and mind sensations, or concentration techniques on concentrating the breath, for example, right? So there's a few techniques we have to develop in order to become aware. That's the initial step. So after that awareness has been built, then we can analyze and we can see much more what's going on inside our mind. Right? The more we're able to understand our inner process, the more capable we will be to apply antidotes at the right time. Because at the moment, most people, when they get irritated or angry at a person or situation, it just overtakes them, right? It's like emotional hijack. There's no control. It goes so fast, within a few minutes, you're gone. You're too late already. You know, so first is this kind of awareness building up. You know? So that means that initially we've just been taken over by these destructive emotions. Yeah? But if you more have built up on this awareness, then you start to see the process much clearer. Yeah? You see the first second of an irritation, then the next second, then the third second. You know? So you have to be much more aware of that process. Yeah? So if you do that, then you see there's different levels of irritation, right? So there's a kind of initial irritation, then it becomes more manifest in our consciousness and becomes really strong without being able to change it at that time. So initially, when it's very in the beginning stages, you can still change it. Yeah? So that has to be recognized. Yeah? So that has to be recognized. And then after recognizing that aspect, you apply the antidotes at that time. Yeah? So, for example, how do we apply the antidotes? Yeah? By two important mental factors, so to say. Yeah? We have kind of main mind and mental factors, or we have primary consciousness and mental factors. Right? So we have 6 types of main consciousness, right? The 5 senses and mental consciousness. Yeah? And each of those 6 types of consciousness needs a kind of group of what we call mental factors to function. Like a manager in a particular office can only produce a particular workload if he has people around him to which he can delegate the work, right? Yeah? So in the same way, we have these 6 types of mind. Amongst the 6 types of mind, the main mind is our mental consciousness, right? That we have to train. Yeah? So with what we call mental factors. Yeah? So there's 2 very important mental factors to be known in this process. I mean, there's many more, but 2 essential ones, which is alertness and mindfulness, so sometimes translated as introspection and mindfulness. So it's 2. So alertness, sometimes they translate as introspection, sometimes alertness has been translated in meta-awareness. It depends on the translator. Yeah? So the Tibetan word is shishin, but actually I, in this case, prefer alertness, right? Because of the function of that particular mental factor, versus mindfulness. Yeah? So alertness has the capacity to be aware of what's going on and ring the bell when it's going the wrong direction, so to say, right? Well, mindfulness, it translates as remembrance, to remember. Yeah? So to remember what? To remember a particular instruction, or to remember a particular intention. Yeah? So what we try to do is, you try to pinpoint down the first second or split second of the irritation, and you notice that down with alertness. With this kind of mental factor. And then alertness recognize it. And then with mindfulness, we remember that we shouldn't get angry, for example, right? By constructive contemplation, I will explain how to do that. Then we learn the faults of a destructive emotion like anger and the benefits of the constructive emotion like practicing patience. Right? So that insight is being remembered by mindfulness. So this kind of remembrance, the actual real translation of mindfulness is kind of remembrance. That's true in the Pali tradition, it's true in Sanskrit as well as in Tibetan, of course. So that's 2 mental factors. So how do we train? Because if you're aware and know, oh, now I'm getting irritated, right? So if you're aware about that, then you can still do something before it takes over, right? Yeah, so that's those 2 mental factors. So how do we train those 2 mental factors? That's very important to know, because the stronger they are, the more we can act and the better we can act. Yeah? So to train in those two mental factors, we train in what we call meditation techniques or concentration techniques. Yeah? So maybe we can do one of those meditations here as well. So one of those techniques is to concentrate upon a particular object. Yeah, so I think you do here also, right? The counting of the breath. Yeah, so if you count the breathing process, you let your mind focus upon the object of concentration, in this case, the counting of the breath. Right? So then at that time also you train in these two mental factors. Yeah, to accomplish kind of strong forms of concentration, you need to mainly depend upon those two factors. Who oppose, there's normally we talk about faults and powers or antidotes, right? So one of the main obstacles of meditation is mental dullness and distraction, right? So in order to let the mind focus upon a particular object, then when we try to meditate, and often happens that our mind is somewhere else, and then we look at the clock and, oh, we're a few minutes gone, what was I doing again? I was supposed to be meditating. Your mind was somewhere else in the country, where it's sunny maybe, or something like that. So that means that the mind is not where it's supposed to be at the time of the counting of the breath. Right? So with alertness, you be aware of that the mind is getting distracted. You see that? And then with mindfulness, you remember at the moment you should only do the counting of the breath, nothing else. Yeah, so that's how you train in these two mental factors, alertness and mindfulness. Right? So by concentrating on the breath, concentrating on the counting, so to say, of the breath. Yeah. So then by training in those two mental factors, later on in daily life, you bring those two mental factors into practice, right? So then as soon as a kind of irritation happens, you be aware of that with alertness, and with mindfulness you remember the instruction how to oppose the destructive emotion anger, with the contemplation on the faults of anger versus the qualities of practicing patience. Yeah, so if you're convinced about the faults of a destructive emotion, you're more inclined not to follow that destructive emotion. Same with an addiction. People who are addicted to smoking or drinking or whatever drugs you have addiction for, or habits, bad habits or whatsoever, the more you're convinced about the faults of that habit or addiction, it easier becomes to think about maybe it's time to stop, right? So that's same with the cigarettes, in India they smoke this kind of little betties, this kind of little things, not real. Now we see more of the real. Not real. The cigarettes we have in the West, and then you see in the West the packages, right? It's like with those photographs of lungs full of cancer, So if you see a package, it's quite terrifying, But if you look at it, yeah, terrifying. But you don't think about it, then it doesn't make impact, right? Then you just keep smoking. Yeah, but if you see the package and you just sit and contemplate, then it builds some kind of potential in the mind. Oh, maybe it's better to stop, right? But if there's no reasoning behind it, then it will never produce the effect, the result it should produce, right? So that's meaning this contemplation of thinking about it extremely important. So that's even more true for our destructive emotions. Yeah. So how do you do that in a kind of structured way? Is to contemplate or analyze from a neutral perspective. Look at a kind of situation in life where you get irritated or annoyed with a person or situation, and then analyze that without getting irritated again. Because if you then get irritated again, then you just meditating on anger becomes kind of not very constructive, right? So you have to look from a distance, like from a scientist observing a particular phenomena. Yeah? Or you can, I find now traveling with a tube in London, then you can see, especially like kind of rush hour, like when it's very busy, people they walk so kind of structured. Their mind is so, not that it's concentration, but the mind is so, going in one direction, without looking right to left and left. They have this kind of, iPhone or smartphone. And sometimes they sit inside the tube and they play a fruit game or, whatever, watching a movie or something. And you can see the mind is inside. And some people these days they have these kind of huge headphones on to, to listen to something, I suppose. But so that means that their mind is inside the screen. Yeah, if you see them, see them? The mind's inside. Yeah, I heard in Leeds there's buses, but it's not that much public transport, so maybe you miss out on this aspect. But you can see, the mind is inside the screen. So, but if you also watch a movie, then if you get attached to the movie, you want to see the end or something, your also mind is going inside, right? So there's no observance of the person watching and the movie. You're inside, right? If you're really attached to a movie and really into it, you want to see the end, the kind of attachment, then you don't really realize what's going on around you. So that we shouldn't have that kind of attitude. If there's a person sitting watching, we should see the movie on the screen and the person watching, and see and analyze what happens. Right? So that same kind of neutral aspect of checking we should have for our mind, because we don't have to watch too many movies, because the mind by itself is pretty much entertaining if you really, if you want to examine things, So it's very funny sometimes. So that's the kind of attitude we should have, to check. So that's kind of a way how to do an analytical meditation and then you analyze an event out of your daily life, that you get irritated or angry at a person or situation, and just observe what happened. Then what did the person say? How did I react? How did it influence my way of thinking? Did it disturb my mind, or was it constructive or destructive? Did I say something after that or not? How did I react? How did the other person react? So you analyze basically. It's like a scientist, what's happening with the mind. Yeah? So that's a kind of analytical meditation on the faults of anger, and you see only a few minutes of kind of irritations for the whole day sometimes, right? So that you analyze, and then you see this mind of irritation, this mind of anger, is actually only producing things unwanted. It's not really, and it didn't bring any benefit, right? Yeah, so that insight is extremely important. Yeah, that's the fuel to change. Yeah, so that's why we have to question what I said before. You have to question, haven't been satisfied that, oh yeah, it's like that. Because if you just like, oh yeah, it's like that, anger is not good, yeah, it's not good. That doesn't change the mind, right? You just make a prayer and anger is not good, and that's not really moving, So you have to do something. So that means you have to use reasoning, because anger does the same thing, right? As I said, within a few split seconds you say, this person is bad because of this. You reason that, right? So you come to a conclusion and that you believe at that time. So now it's important to oppose this with constructive thinking and see, oh, this destructive emotion, anger, is not leading me to a particular direction. I said something wrong to a person, because of that the whole situation escalated, you worry about it then, oh, I shouldn't have said this, So actually it's not constructive at all. So you come to that conclusion, that's one thing. So you come to a conclusion and focus on the faults. Then, next step is you analyze the benefits of a constructive way of thinking, like practicing patience, right? So practicing patience means a mind that keeps its cool, that, a mind that is kind of relaxed and still can act. Yeah, practicing patience doesn't mean, some people think if you practice patience, you just put yourself in a corner and people can do whatever they like. It's not like that, Because a mind of patience can be very strong, like a school teacher or a manager, or still have a very clear overview of the problem, clarity is there, and wants to make a decision, and can even still say something to an individual, like, oh, you did something wrong, maybe it's better to do like this, Can even be quite firm, Same when you meet His Holiness Dalai Lama on the screen, or, you see him very smiling and nice. But then when you meet with His Holiness in person, when you have to discuss a project, His Holiness is like a businessman. Like, oh, very clear thinking. Because if you don't have that constructive mind, you never move forward, right? So then what do we do if that happens? How do we deal with that? So clear. The clarity is there. But the mind is at peace, right? So that means that kind of mind is much more constructive. So you see the benefits of that, right? And you come to a conclusion and you focus on that conclusion. Yeah? So you can see that puts imprints in the mind for direction to follow. This is more better than the other one. So that's the kind of direction we have to do, right? So then if you do that over a sustained period of time, not like a weekend course or something like that, but a little bit longer, then it's possible to train. One of my friends just I remembered actually yesterday in traffic because, you know, yesterday coming from the railway station to David's place, it's like, yeah, rain and busy and traffic jams, right? So also the Netherlands has a lot of traffic jams. And one of my friends who started Buddhism the same year, 1993, he used to be extremely uptight in traffic, you know. In the mornings he had to spend about 45 minutes and then, before going home again, about 45 minutes. And then, yeah, a lot of time was just wasted, like, just moving forward, you know, kind of thing. Especially in winter when it's with wet snow, you know. And, you know, there's slippery areas and, you know, probably same here. So then he used to get so annoyed about a person who just comes in front, you know. And he used to shout at the person and really hold the steering wheel like that, you know, was biting in the steering wheel, you know. So he used to so uptight, he told me. And then the person in front, of course, it's cold, so the windows are closed. The person listens maybe to some music, didn't get disturbed by this kind of attitude, right? So he only had himself. Yeah? So that means if you have a situation you cannot change, right? You cannot change that traffic, but you can deal with the mind, right? So that's what Shantideva said. If you have a problem, you solve it. You don't have to worry because you can solve it. If you have a problem and you cannot solve it because it's not within your capacity to solve it, then also you don't have to worry. But you know, because you cannot solve it anyway, so you have to deal with the situation. You know? So that's kind of mind training that helps us to deal with every situation, and that proves, like among the Tibetans, that because they put a lot of, I mean, it's a part of the culture, right? This kind of way of thinking. So that means that there's some research done by Harvard Medical School that the people who were in occupied Tibet being put in prison, not for a year or 2 years, but for sometimes for decades, right? Being tortured until, you know, yeah, tortured, no food, almost on the edge of dying for many years, you know. Very, very severe kind of difficult conditions. So when they come out of that prison, then the majority doesn't have a post-traumatic stress disorder. Physically, they have to be treated because of the electric shocks and everything, you know, but mentally, they're perfectly okay. So that's a quite interesting kind of research, because that comes from mind training. They know how to deal with situations where very difficult circumstances. You know? Yeah. So in the West, it's slightly different. When, you know, and here we have a train who is like 1 minute or 2 minutes late. Some people
have PTSD.
yeah. People get annoyed, right? Yeah. So my record in the Indian train is 82 hours. So there's one train from Delhi to Bodh who normally takes about 14 hours, was delayed by 32 hours. You know, so that's, but yeah, people just take it like, it's quite normal in that area, north part of London. But you know how to deal with it because that's the way of life, you know. But that means that that trip was okay. It was not kind of that bad, you know. But if you think like that, oh, 1 hour late, then the mind gets so stirred that actually you don't solve the problem. Yeah? So that means you only have to deal with your mind. So that's a kind of two things. So then back to my friend in the Netherlands, after thinking about, you know, the faults of what he did himself, actually with getting angry again and again in traffic, he saw that it's not solving the problem, it's only having himself. You know? So then he did with this kind of analytical meditation, and then I met him again after every few years. I think every, I don't know, but maybe after 10 years I met him again, 15 years. And then he said, I'm now just laughing about it. You know? Because situation I cannot change anyway, but so that's possible, yeah. So anyway, so then how do we do that? We first of all have to build up self-awareness, right? With a kind of meditation of counting the breath in order to generate these two mental factors, alertness and mindfulness. Yeah. So when they are developed, when you concentrate on an object, and as soon as the mind drifts away, with alertness you recognize it, and with mindfulness you bring the mind back. The more you train in those two mental factors, the more capable you will be to direct your mind in daily life, to thoughts. So directing your mind, or directing negative thoughts towards positive thoughts, I mean, that's evident even in other forms of people with more severe mental issues, like OCD, for example. It's been proven that by the power of mental training, yeah, by these two mental factors, actually, people can get cured. So if you read the books of Jeffrey Schwartz, then you know that, you know, using regular medication didn't solve the problem. So then Jeffrey Schwartz used this technique of the power of mental intention, as it's called, or mental force, right? But it actually talks about these same two mental factors to direct the person not to think, not to follow the thoughts of need to wash your hands, but to follow the thoughts, let's go to the garden instead, or something like that. So that's possible. If you train those two mental factors, you be aware of what's going on in your mind, and then on the other part, you decide what to do. There's more free will, so to say. So that's a very interesting research. A lot of things to say about, from a Buddhist perspective, extremely interesting. Because it talks about neuroscience, it talks about bringing quantum mechanics into brain activity, and it talks about free will and the possibility of directing your mind in a particular direction. It's very interesting research. Yeah. Anyway. It's because I'm a little bit scientific background, so I find those things always very inspiring to read sometimes, that actually talks about very similar things. Yeah, so that means we can direct the mind, yeah, because it's been proven that, if you read the research of Richard Davison and other important persons in neuroscience, if you train your mind, you train your brain. Right? So you can train your thinking thought process. Yeah? So that's a way to do that. Yeah. So you want to do meditation together? Training in this? Yeah. So we will do a threefold meditation. Yeah. So meaning, first we do just mere awareness meditation, that you just be aware of the breathing process. So you can either choose the movement of the lungs or the air going up and down through your nostrils. Right? So just meaning bring the mind a little bit more inward. Yeah, that's the first step of kind of awareness of body cessation. Right? So we do that for about, let's say, 2 minutes. Then after that, we do a kind of concentration meditation to get more constructive in a particular direction, training these two mental factors. We need an object to concentrate. If you learn how to concentrate on an object, then also you learn how to direct your mind to that object and not to follow particular thoughts, right? So the more you train in concentration, the more control you're going to get over your mind. Because the more you're capable of not follow negative thoughts or distractions at the time you concentrate, the more capable you will be in daily life not to follow those destructive emotions or not to follow those negative thoughts. Right? That's a kind of temporary solution to the problem. Yeah, so that's the first 2 meditations we do. Yeah? After that we break, and then I explain how to do the analytical one. Yeah? So first we do kind of generating this self-awareness, as I said. Yeah? So that's very important. After that we do kind of self-discipline from the point of view of applying the antidotes, so to say. Yeah? So let's first do the awareness meditation and the counting of the breath. Yeah? So sit, everybody knows how to sit, right? Yeah. So make sure that at the moment you're just aware of the breathing exercise. Yeah, just breathe in and out through your nose. Yeah, a natural process, and then just to be aware, or try to be aware about the breathing process, either the movement of the lungs or the air coming in and out of your nostrils, and any thoughts that comes to mind, or things you hear outside, or thoughts of the past or the future. Don't pay attention, but come back to just mere being aware of the process of the breathing. Yeah, so let's do that for about 2 minutes. then when the mind has settled down a bit, then next try to concentrate. Yeah, so try to count every in-breath as 1, out-breath as 2, in-breath as 3, and then count from 1 to 10, and then start over counting. Yeah, so the object of concentration here is the counting of the breath from 1 to 10, and then start over counting. And then from the corner of the, yeah, so try to do that first. Yeah, so also where the thought comes up, or the past or the future, in most cases, then don't follow it. Just think that the only thing you're doing right now is the counting of the breath, nothing else. So let's try to do that also for about 2 minutes, just the mere counting of the breath. So now try to apply those 2 mental factors, right? It's called alertness and mindfulness. So try to be alert as soon as a thought comes up about the past or the future, or we hear something, think about something. Just be aware that it happens straight away before you move in that direction, the distraction. And then with mindfulness you remember that you're supposed to be counting the breath, right? So try to keep continuing in that way and don't pay attention to those thoughts. So try to apply those 2 mental factors as the antidotes towards distraction, so to say. So let's try to do that again for about 2 minutes. Right, and when you stop. So it's better to meditate a short period of time and make sure there's quality, right? That you do, better do 2-3 minutes at a time and the mind is not distracted, or at least, you come back again to the counting of the breath and try to meditate too long and then there's no quality, right? And sometimes the mind is engaged in daydreaming, and that's not very constructive. Yeah, so that's the first step, and then the next step is this. That's what we call the concentration meditation, right? And the next step is the analytical meditation, which actually is going to change the mind. Yeah? So, analytical meditation, if you contemplate, as you just described, you examine the situation like irritation or anger, right, in daily life, and you look from a distance without getting involved, you know, because if you get involved, then the mind gets agitated, and that is, you meditate on getting angry then instead of meditating on patience, right? So that's why you, from a neutral perspective, you examine the faults of the afflictions, and for a few minutes, then you come to a conclusion, and you focus on that conclusion, right? So then, having done that, you do the same thing with a constructive emotion like practicing patience, right? So if you keep your mind cool, or you keep a relaxed state of mind without getting agitated, then the mind, there's much more clarity. There's much more possibility to think in a constructive way what to say and how to go in a particular direction, right? So you be convinced about that aspect, and then you also concentrate on that for about a minute. Yeah, so both of those analytical meditation techniques, analyzes, comes to a conclusion, and focus on that conclusion, right? So that leaves a kind of potential in our mind that we can remember next time we get agitated with the power of mental factor mindfulness, right? So the stronger our insight in analytical meditation becomes, the more powerful the mindfulness becomes to direct the mind at the time of the actual practice, right? So then this alertness is extremely important to be aware, because if anger takes over too much, it's very difficult to still counteract it, right? Because anger is so strong. When it takes over, then it's most of the time it's too late, right? So we have to, in initial states, apply the antidotes. So then this kind of analytical approach helps us to, make this mental factor mindfulness really strong. Because the stronger it becomes, the strongest I'm not going to follow this thought. So same with people in OCD, and same people with, then you can see how actually our mental habituation can actually cause a particular brain structure to change. There's this research with Jeffrey Schwartz we've done with Leonardo DiCaprio, one of the famous actors. He played a movie called The Aviator, in which I never saw, but I saw the research, in which he played as an OCD patient. So after, he didn't have a severe OCD problem, but after screening for 2-3 months, I don't know how long the period actually was, he got an OCD problem. Because he forced himself, now I have to act like this, now I have to act like that. So by the power of that habituation, after the screening was done, he got actually an OCD problem. Then he went to Jeffrey Schwartz with the same techniques of habituation in another direction. He got rid of the OCD problem. Very interesting research. Oh. So you can see that initially there's a mental intention of I have to act like this. That causes the brain to change, right? So then, he did with Henry Stepp a very interesting research about the power of free will, bringing quantum physics into neuroscience. Anyway, that's all too complicated for today, but it's very interesting. So then, by the power of this kind of mental attention, he got his habits, right? So he changed the brain with kind of, in a not a very constructive way. So then after he got an OCD problem, then Jeffrey Schwartz helped him to get rid of it, also with mental kind of activity. So it's very interesting. So that proves if you can deal with severe mental issues like that, then of course we can change the mind, right? So then of course we can deal with our daily kind of problems maybe much better. So want to give that a try? Yeah. So when we do the analytical meditation, just take one example out of your daily life in which you got irritated or disturbed, and then you analyze actually what happened to your mind and how you reacted to others, and was that beneficial or not. So try to see that in that direction. So again, before we start, we do a little bit of concentration. So count the breath in that regard. So again, count from 1 to 10, and then start over counting. So let's do that counting of the breath for about 2 minutes. And when the mind has settled down a bit, try to take an example out of your daily life in which you get some irritation was there, or kind of aversion that built up, or kind of anger that came to mind, and how you reacted and how that actually influenced the relationship between you and the other person or persons. So try to see that anger actually only caused a lot of problems to arise, disturbed your own mind. You might have said something wrong, because of the irritation your mind was disturbed for hours after, and maybe you lost appetite or sleep. So try to analyze the kind of faults of the destructive emotion anger for about a minute or two, different reasons. So let's try to do that. And then try to reach to a conclusion here that actually has the insight that this destructive emotion, anger, actually only has faults. There's no benefits from the point of view of to be experienced that is of any benefit in the sense of solving a problem. It only disturbs the mind and creates kind of more negative verbal or even physical acts. And it's not very constructive. Actually, only has drawbacks. So try to come to the conclusion that anger is like that, and then focus on that conclusion for about a minute. And then we move to the mind of patient, try to see if the mind keeps itself, in a neutral state, in a state of being in control, or a mind that keeps itself kind of not going in that direction of the irritation, but just neutral and capacity of the clarity and analyzing the problems and motivating yourself to say something correctly. That kind of state of mind is much more constructive. Yes. There's many qualities to be found in that kind of development. So So try to analyze it for yourself also for about 2 minutes. And also here try to come to a conclusion that this kind of constructive way of thinking is actually much more beneficial, right? If you keep the clarity of the mind, you can solve the problem much better. You can say things with the correct motivation without losing control. So it's much more beneficial to have this mind of patience, right? So come to that conclusion and then focus on that conclusion for about a minute. And then try to come to an overall conclusion, having those two insights, yeah, seeing that destructive emotion, anger, is kind of, has only drawbacks, but the constructive emotion, like practicing patience, actually has many benefits, right? So try to have a strong insight that's more constructive in the future to follow this mind of patience versus the mind of the irritation of anger, yeah? And come to that conclusion and focus on that conclusion for about a minute. Okay, then you can stop. So this conclusion that we read, if you concentrate, that's where we normally say, right? We have the wisdom coming from hearing, contemplation, and meditation. So first we gather the information by understanding if it's either the Lamrim or any other subject. Yeah, we have to read, we have to receive some instructions, then we know how to meditate on it. Right? So that's the first step, getting information, right? The wisdom from hearing. Yeah. So then we analyze back and forth, right? So in that way, if you meditate on the Lamrim, or what we do here, very simplified forms of, I mean, it looks simple, but the real practice is not that easy. But you know, from the Buddhist point of view, it's kind of the basics of analytical meditation. So, first of all, before we start, also all the meditation we do in Lamrim, it's very important to know why do we do this particular meditation, right? Because we have to place a reason why I'm engaging in this. You know, so if those who engage in Lamrim practice, they know, okay, presume a rebirth to get myself motivated, take the assets. Right? Death and impermanence to motivate myself not to waste time. So that are particular reasons, you know, to contemplate why do I have to meditate. Because in the Buddhist practice, we meditate a lot about death and impermanence and suffering. And So people might think, oh, those Buddhists, they, you know, they always meditate on these kind of things we don't like in life. You know, they must be so unhappy and depressed. But actually, it's the opposite, because if you understand reality, it's much easier to deal when you meet reality. Because one day we're going to meet reality, death and impermanence. For example, in the early days, same thing, right? In the West, death and impermanence was being kind of, don't talk about it, put it in the corner, right? But now we have Death Cafe, I heard, as a kind of movement within the UK, right? That's first thought was only within the Buddhist centers, but it's everywhere, right? So it's very, very important, you know, to be aware of things we're going to meet one day, you know. So there's another aspect where we can see, if you understand reality well, and you act according to that reality, then when we meet that reality, there's no kind of difficulty in the sense of acceptance. Right? So that's why it's very important to contemplate all these aspects of our, you know, things we one day can meet, right? Understand that reality. I always put my own mother as an example. My mother doesn't call herself a Buddhist, but her son is walking around like this for quite some years. So she reads books of His Holiness and Lamrim and you know. And then she told me that it was very beneficial, because when my father got cancer, when my father passed away, my father and mother had a very good relationship. Of course, they had problems, you know. Every relationship has their problems, but overall, a very good relationship. But my father passed away. Most of my aunts and uncles, they thought my mother goes in depression for months, right? But it didn't happen. Sadness was there, of course, but then that didn't happen. And then she told me later, she said, I was thinking about this possibility already before, right? That things can happen like that. So it's very interesting. So that's why in the Buddhist point of view of when you do meditation, it's very important to know why do we meditate on a particular subject. Right? So with this analytical meditation, it's quite clear in order to practice patience, to go against destructive emotions, right? Yeah, so then you get information, right? So first you have to know why. The second aspect of our practice is how do I do it? So for the Lamrim meditation, how do I meditate on that impermanence, right? Then you have the 3 roots, and each of those 3 roots has 3 reasons, right? So that's a way how you meditate on it. And then the third question you should always ask yourself is kind of check, right? Did I do it correctly? Did it produce the right thought? Or did it produce the right insight? The correct form of training. That's very important, you know. It's kind of reviewing. It's like a business, right? You know why you have to do a business deal, and you have to know how you do it, and you evaluate after if it's done correctly according to your plan, right? So our mind, same thing. You know, you have to know why do I do a particular meditation, how do I do it, and how do I know I did it correctly after having done some meditation. So here, wisdom from hearing, you get information, right? Because you have to know how to do it and why you have to do it, right? And what kind of result it should produce. So that comes from the wisdom of hearing, understanding the instruction, yeah, by reading, studying, hearing, listening to the instruction, yeah, and then you also know how to do it. So then, in the analytical meditation, as we just did, right? So the analytical meditation produced the wisdom from contemplation. Yeah, as I said before, by merely thinking, yeah, it's true, anger is not constructive, it's better not to develop it, right? That by itself will not move your mind in that direction. Right? Of course, there's a start point, right? So that's why you have to have this wisdom come from contemplation. You have to think about things, to come to a conclusion, you know. So that's why the wisdom of contemplation is extremely important. Yeah? And then on top of that, when we reach a conclusion, we focus on that conclusion, and that's the wisdom comes from concentration. Yeah? So that's, or the wisdom of meditation, as we say, right? So the wisdom from hearing, contemplation, and meditation. Yeah, so that's we have to apply in this kind of, yeah, in the parts in our mental training. Yeah. So then, yeah, I was planning to talk about ignorance, but then it's already lunchtime. But, yeah, I'm going to talk about ignorance because with emptiness you have to be more prepared. So you have to be ready, because emptiness is a thing that is the essential teaching of the Buddha, the most important teaching of the Buddha, but also the most difficult one. So mostly when you reach emptiness, people fall asleep or walk away, or it's like, you know, emptiness, you have to have certain kind of, we say, store of merit to find it very exciting and to move forward. Yeah, but it's a very important teaching, because what I said before, what we talked about just now is kind of these destructive emotions, right? Like anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, and modern things like anxiety and fear, depression, they actually rooted in something more essential, kind of fundamental, what we call ignorance. Is grasping at a concrete I and mine, right? So whenever we get angry, or when we get irritated, or a destructive emotion like attachment, like these people in China, in front of the shop, you know, it's very funny because it talks about, you know, the concrete me, myself, and I kind of that motivates the person to get angry or to get attached. Right? I, also iPhone, iPad, very interesting. So it means I need this now, you know. So that means that this kind of self-centeredness of which is related with the kind of, you know, seeing the self existing from its own side or inherently. That's a fundamental aspect of how we perceive reality, but actually doesn't exist. But we believe it to exist in that way, and that's why we generate all these destructive emotions. So what we did with this simple contemplation with this now is to temporarily take care of these kind of destructive emotions, right? You generate more awareness with this awareness meditation and counting the breath, and then with the analytical meditation you counteract the actual affliction. You see that? So you can counteract it. But the seeds of these kind of destructive emotions are these kind of concrete building blocks of reality that we think they exist, but actually they don't. Things don't exist that concrete out there. And that's not only a Buddhist thing, also in quantum mechanics you come to similar conclusions, right? That the things out there appear very concrete, but on the quantum level it's just the law of dependent origination that plays a role. The relationship between the individual particles is more of interest and important than the individual particles themselves, right? So in the Buddha 2,500 years ago already talked about similar things, you know? That things appear very concrete, but actually if you examine, they don't exist the way it appears. You know? So that's what we're going to talk in the afternoon. That because yeah, the ultimate reality, then we have to talk about a little bit more about, you know, what is ignorance? What actually causes these destructive emotions to come about? And if you take those kind of incorrect forms of consciousness away, then it brings much more productive states of mind that even leads up to nirvana, meaning a state of mind that is without any affliction whatsoever. So we talked about if that's possible or not, so we will prove. I mean, we try to discuss in the afternoon that that's possible. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe we stop for lunch.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, if there's any questions, then we can still try to answer. No? People hungry. Yeah, so lunchtime then? Yeah. It's getting warmer now inside.